What would you do if you discovered 5 children asleep in your car with nothing but a mysterious note? For Alexander Reed, a 41-year-old tech billionaire who had everything money could buy, this unexpected encounter would shatter his carefully constructed world. 5 identical faces, bearing an uncanny resemblance to his own, would force him to confront a past he thought was buried forever. Before we begin this extraordinary journey, take a moment to share this video with someone who needs to hear that family is where true wealth begins. Now let's discover how 5 little strangers turned a billionaire's life upside down in the most beautiful way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The October rain drummed against the windows of Reed Technologies' headquarters in Boston as Alexander Reed studied the quarterly projections on the massive screen dominating his office wall. At 41, he commanded an empire valued at over $17 billion, self-made success built from a single revolutionary algorithm he'd developed in his college dorm room. "The Singapore deal looks promising," he remarked to his executive assistant, Olivia Parker, who stood nearby with her ever-present tablet. "Schedule a virtual meeting with their team for tomorrow morning." "That would be 4 a.m. our time, sir," Olivia reminded him gently. Alexander nodded without hesitation. "That's fine. Have the briefing documents sent to my lake house. I'll review them tonight." Such requests were routine. Sleep had always been negotiable in Alexander's pursuit of excellence. His relentless work ethic had earned him a reputation as a brilliant but emotionally distant leader, the machine of Massachusetts, as Forbes had once dubbed him. The rain had intensified by the time Alexander left the office. The parking garage was nearly empty, his custom-built electric Aston Martin standing alone in his reserved space. His security team had already departed. Alexander had dismissed them earlier, preferring solitude for his drive to Lake Winnipesaukee, where his modernist retreat stood on a private peninsula. The rain-slicked roads reflected his headlights as Alexander navigated through the deserted streets, mentally rehearsing the upcoming negotiations. The drive to New Hampshire was familiar enough that he could almost do it in his sleep, which was why the unexpected detour notification on his navigation system caught his attention. "Road closure on Route 93, the automated voice announced. "Calculating alternative route." Alexander frowned as the system directed him onto a series of smaller roads that wound through several small towns he rarely had reason to visit. The storm had worsened, sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere yards ahead. In the small town of Millfield, a flash of lightning illuminated a "Bridge Out" sign, just in time for him to swerve onto what appeared to be an even smaller access road. "Where the hell am I?" he muttered, noting that the navigation system had lost signal. The narrow road curved around the edge of a darkened state park, the trees forming an ominous tunnel through the downpour. A sudden movement caused Alexander to brake sharply. For a split second, he thought he saw a figure dart across the road before disappearing into the trees. He squinted through the windshield, but the darkness revealed nothing. "Great," he breathed, reaching for his phone only to find it dead. The charging cable in his briefcase apparently disconnected during the drive. With no other option, Alexander continued forward cautiously, relieved when the trees thinned and revealed the lights of what appeared to be a small diner on the roadside. The neon "Crossroads Diner" sign flickered weakly in the storm as Alexander pulled into the gravel parking lot. Only 2 other vehicles were visible, an ancient pickup truck and what looked like the owner's sedan. Deciding a coffee and directions were worth the delay, Alexander parked and made a dash for the entrance. The bell above the door jangled as he entered, shaking rainwater from his custom Burberry coat. The diner's warmth and the smell of coffee provided unexpected comfort after the tension of the drive. "Nasty night to be out," remarked an older woman behind the counter, her name tag reading Dot. Her eyes widened slightly as she registered. His expensive attire and the Aston Martin visible through the window. "Lost your way, honey?" she asked, already pouring coffee into a mug. "Navigation system failed," Alexander explained, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I need to get to Lake Winnipesaukee." Dot nodded, grabbing a paper napkin and sketching out directions. "You're only about 20 minutes out of your way. This storm's causing havoc with the power lines and cell towers." While waiting for the rain to subside a little, Alexander sipped his coffee, surprised to find it excellent. The diner had a nostalgic quality that reminded him of something half-forgotten. Road trips with his grandfather, perhaps, before the old man had passed away when Alexander was just 16. "You heading to one of those fancy lake houses?" Dot asked conversationally. Alexander nodded. "I have a place on the peninsula." "Must be nice," she said without envy, just stating a fact. "Though big houses get awful lonely, I imagine." Something about her casual observation struck Alexander like a physical blow. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "I suppose they can," he replied noncommittally, leaving a $50 bill on the counter as he prepared to leave. The storm had slightly eased. "You be careful out there," Dot called after him. "Lots of deer on these back roads." The rain had diminished to a steady drizzle as Alexander followed Dot's directions, turning onto increasingly familiar roads that would lead him to the lake. His thoughts, however, remained unsettlingly adrift. Awful, lonely. Why had such a simple observation from a stranger affected him? Perhaps because it cut too close to a truth he generally avoided examining. Despite his countless achievements, the palatial homes, the business empire, Alexander Reed slept alone each night in a house designed to accommodate a family he'd never built. By the time the security gates of his lake house came into view, Alexander had managed to regain his mental equilibrium. The house's exterior lights activated automatically as he approached, illuminating the modernist glass and steel structure that architectural magazines had featured multiple times. He punched in the security code and drove into the heated garage that housed his collection of vintage and luxury vehicles. The silence as he cut the engine was profound, broken only by the diminishing patter of rain on the roof. Alexander gathered his briefcase and stepped out of the car, his mind already shifting to the Singapore proposal and the conference call scheduled for dawn. Then he heard it, a sound so faint he might have missed it if not for the peculiar acoustics of the garage, a soft, almost inaudible sigh, like someone breathing in sleep. Alexander froze, his senses suddenly hyper-alert. The sound came again from inside his car. Impossible. He'd just been driving alone. Slowly, he turned back toward the vehicle. The interior lights had automatically dimmed, but not before he glimpsed movement in the back seat. Movement that shouldn't exist. Heart hammering, Alexander hit the remote to turn the interior lights back on, simultaneously reaching for the emergency alert button on his key fob. But his finger paused before pressing it, as the light revealed what, or rather who, was in his car. Children. Not one, but 5 small children, huddled together across his back seat and the storage space behind it, apparently having been hidden from view by the car's privacy glass and his focus on the stormy drive. 5 identical faces, peaceful in sleep despite their cramped positions. Each appeared to be around 6 years old, dressed in worn but clean clothing. Alexander stared in disbelief, his mind refusing to process the impossibility before him. How had 5 children gotten into his locked car? Why were they here? And most disturbingly, why did their features, even in sleep, stir a sense of recognition that sent a chill down his spine? One of the children, A little girl, positioned protectively in the middle of her siblings, stirred slightly. Her hand clutched what appeared to be a folded piece of paper, something written on it visible even from where Alexander stood. He leaned closer, careful not to wake them yet, and read the 3 words written in a child's uneven handwriting. "You're our father." Alexander Reed, the man who controlled markets and moved billions with a single decision, found himself completely frozen, his carefully ordered world collapsing around him as 5 identical children slept peacefully in his car, holding a truth he wasn't prepared to face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For several moments, Alexander stood paralyzed, his breath forming small clouds in the cool air of the garage. The reality before him defied logic. 5 children, identical in every feature, somehow hidden in his car. And that note. His mind recoiled from its implication. With trembling fingers, he reached for his phone again, only to remember it was dead. His security system could summon help, but something held him back. The children looked so peaceful, so vulnerable. And there was something about their faces, something hauntingly familiar. "Hey," he said softly, unsure how to proceed. "Wake up." The little girl in the middle stirred first, her eyes fluttering open. They were a striking shade of amber, exactly like his own. She blinked at him without fear, as if she had expected to find him there. "We found you," she said simply, her voice clear despite having just woken. Her words seemed to rouse the others. One by one, they awakened, 5 pairs of identical amber eyes now fixed on Alexander. Their expressions ranged from cautious hope to studied suspicion. "How did you get in my car?" Alexander asked, struggling to keep his voice even. "Where are your parents?" The tallest of the 5, a boy with a small scar through his right eyebrow, answered with surprising composure for a child his age. "Our mom is gone. Aunt Rebecca said we had to stay with her now, but then we found Mom's special box." His gaze was direct, unflinching. "It had your pictures and this address. We came to find you." Alexander's mind raced. Special box? Pictures of him? None of this made sense. "What's your mum's name?" he asked, dreading the answer. "Sophia Wilson," replied the girl who had awakened first. She extended the note toward him, revealing not just the 3 words he'd seen, but a photograph attached to it, a picture of a woman he hadn't seen in 7 years. Alexander took the paper with numb fingers. Sophia? Of course it was Sophia. The woman who had disappeared from his life without explanation after their 2-year relationship ended abruptly. The timing would be right. These children appeared to be about 6 years old. "I'm Lily," the girl continued, pointing to each of her siblings in turn. "That's Lucas." The boy with the scarred eyebrow nodded. "This is Liam, Layla, and Logan." Alexander's eyes drifted to Lucas's eyebrow again, the small scar cutting through it. Unconsciously, his fingers traced his own right eyebrow, where an identical mark had existed since a childhood accident. "You should come inside," he found himself saying, the words emerging before he'd fully processed his decision. "It's cold. Out here." The quintuplets extricated themselves from the car with practice coordination, forming a tight cluster as they followed Alexander toward the house entrance. They carried small backpacks that he hadn't noticed before, their only possessions apparently. The lake house's automatic lighting systems activated as they entered, illuminating the stark, minimalist interior with its wall-to-wall windows overlooking the darkened lake. The children's eyes widened at the expansive space, but they remained clustered together, a unified front in unfamiliar territory. "Are you hungry?" Alexander asked, suddenly conscious of how ill-equipped his bachelor kitchen might be for feeding children. 5 solemn nods answered him. In the bright light of the house, Alexander could see details that the dim garage had hidden. Their clothes were clean but worn, their shoes scuffed from heavy use. These children had been taken care of, but not lavishly. He led them to the kitchen, grateful he'd had his assistant stock the refrigerator for his weekend stay. As he prepared simple sandwiches, the limit of his culinary skills, Alexander observed the quintuplets. They moved with an eerie synchronicity, seamlessly compensating for each other's needs. When Liam struggled to climb onto a high bar stool, Lucas automatically provided support. When Logan seemed overwhelmed by the strange surroundings, Lily squeezed his hand reassuringly. "How did you get here?" Alexander asked as he placed the food before them. "From wherever you were before." "We took the bus," Layla spoke for the first time, her voice quieter than her siblings. "And then we walked a lot. We saw your car at the diner and climbed in when you were inside." Alexander's mind boggled at the logistics of 5-6-year-olds, navigating public transportation and then finding their way to him. "How long have you been traveling?" 2 days, Lucas answered, his protective gaze never leaving Alexander. "We left after the funeral." Funeral? Alexander felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Lily's eyes welled with tears. "Mum went to heaven 3 weeks ago. Car accident." Alexander sat heavily on a kitchen stool, his world tilting on its axis. Sophia was dead. The quintuplets watched him carefully, gauging his reaction with eyes that mirrored his own. "Aunt Rebecca said we had to live with her now," Lily continued, her small voice steady despite her tears. "But she always said bad things about you. Mom never did. She told us our daddy was smart and built things that helped people." "She kept your picture," Liam added, speaking for the first time, "and newspaper articles about your company." Alexander's throat constricted. "I never knew," he said, more to himself than the children, "about any of you." Lily reached into her small backpack and withdrew a worn envelope. "This is for you. Mom wrote it before. With unsteady hands, Alexander accepted the envelope. Inside was a letter dated just a month earlier, written in Sophia's familiar flowing script. "Alexander, if you're reading this, then our children have found you, which means I am gone. I've instructed them to bring this to you only if something happens to me. I know what you must be thinking. Why didn't I tell you? Why did I leave without explanation? The truth is complicated and painful, but our quintuplets deserve to know their father, and you deserve to know them. 7 years ago, when I discovered I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. We had talked about marriage, about building a life together. I came to your office to share the news, but instead overheard your conversation with James Harrington about the acquisition offer, how children and family would derail everything you'd worked for. I left without speaking to you, heartbroken. 2 months later, when the doctor revealed I was carrying quintuplets, an extremely rare natural occurrence, I convinced myself I was protecting you from a burden you never wanted. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I should have given you the choice, but our 5 miracles have had a wonderful life filled with love, even if it wasn't filled with luxury. Now I ask the impossible, that you consider opening your heart and home to them. They are extraordinary. Alexander, Lily has your determination, Lucas your analytical mind, Layla your creativity, Liam your kindness, and Logan your curiosity. They are the best parts of us both. Whether you choose to embrace fatherhood or find them another path, please be gentle with their hearts. They've lost enough already. I never stopped loving the man I thought you could be." Sophia Alexander read the letter twice, his vision blurring. The memory Sophia referenced crashed over him with devastating clarity. A conversation with his main investor about a crucial acquisition, words spoken carelessly about family being a distraction from his ambitions. Words Sophia had overheard and taken to heart. He looked up to find 5 pairs of identical eyes watching him with an unsettling intensity. "Did you know about us?" Lucas asked directly, his young voice carrying the weight of a much older soul. Alexander shook his head slowly. "No," he answered truthfully, "but I should have." An uncomfortable silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the sound of rain resuming outside, pattering against the wall of windows. "Are you going to send us away?" Layla asked, her voice barely audible. Alexander studied their faces, these 5 children who carried his features, his blood, who had traversed miles to find him with nothing but a photograph and hope. Children he hadn't known existed until 30 minutes ago. "No," he said finally, the word forming a commitment he hadn't planned but somehow couldn't avoid. "I'm not sending you anywhere." Relief visibly washed over the quintuplets, though Lucas maintained his protective stance. "Where's Aunt Rebecca now?" Alexander asked, realizing he needed to address the legal implications immediately. "She thinks we're at school," Lily explained. "She won't know we're gone until tonight, when she comes home from work." Alexander checked the time, nearly 10 p.m. She must be frantic by now. Logan, who had remained almost entirely silent, spoke unexpectedly. "She said we were too much trouble. That's why she wanted to split us up." "Split you up?" Alexander's attention sharpened. 5 heads nodded in unison. "She said quintuplets are too expensive," Lily elaborated. "She found different families to adopt us separately. We were supposed to go next week." The thought of these 5 siblings being separated and dispersed hit Alexander with unexpected force. No wonder they had risked everything to find him. "That's not happening," he said firmly, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "You're staying together." For the first time, a flicker of hope crossed Lucas's serious face. "With you?" Alexander looked around his sterile, minimalist house, designed for a solitary bachelor, not a family of 5 children. His mind raced through the professional commitments awaiting him, the Singapore deal, board meetings, the upcoming international expansion. None of it had prepared him for this moment. Yet, looking at these 5 faces, faces that carried echoes of his own, Alexander felt something shift within him, as if puzzle pieces long missing had suddenly appeared. "Yes," he said, making a decision that would irreversibly change the trajectory of his life. "With me." Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows of the lake house, where a man who had built an empire was confronted with the one thing his billions couldn't instantly solve: how to become a father overnight to 5 children he never knew he had. The quintuplets had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from their journey and the emotional turbulence of the day. Alexander had improvised sleeping arrangements in the guest bedroom, a king-size bed where all 5 children now lay in a protective cluster, their breathing synchronized even in sleep. Standing in the doorway, watching these unexpected additions to his life, Alexander felt as though he was observing someone else's reality. The past few hours had shattered his understanding of the world and himself. With each passing moment, the magnitude of what had happened, of what he had agreed to, settled more heavily upon his shoulders. His phone, now charged, had been buzzing continuously for the past hour. Messages from his executive team about the Singapore deal, an urgent text from his lawyer about a pending acquisition, and a reminder about tomorrow's early conference call. The machinery of his empire continued turning, oblivious to the seismic shift in its creator's life. Alexander retreated to his home office, closing the door quietly. His fingers hovered over his phone, uncertain who to call first. The legal implications alone were staggering. He had no documentation proving paternity, no custody rights, no legal standing whatsoever. For all intents and purposes, he had just taken in 5 runaways. The children's aunt, Rebecca Wilson, according to the return address on Sophia's letter, would surely report them missing by now. Alexander could be facing kidnapping charges if he didn't handle this correctly. He dialed the one person he trusted to navigate this delicate situation. Do you have any idea what time it is? Came the groggy voice of Eleanor Blackwood, his personal attorney for the past decade. I need you at my lake house, now. Alexander's voice was tense, controlled. There was a momentary silence on the line. In 15 years, Alexander had never once requested Eleanor's personal presence outside of business hours. What's happened? Her voice sharpened, sleep falling away. Alexander faltered, the reality still difficult to verbalize. I just found out I have children, 5 of them. They're here with me now. 5. Eleanor's disbelief was palpable, even through the phone. Alexander, what are you talking about? Quintuplets, 6 years old. Their mother died recently and they found me. They've been traveling for days, Eleanor. Their aunt apparently wants to separate them. Another long pause. I'll be there in an hour, she said finally. Don't call anyone else. Don't post anything. Online. Don't let anyone see those children until I get there. After hanging up, Alexander paced the confines of his office, the walls suddenly feeling closer than they had just hours before. His gaze fell on a framed magazine cover, his first appearance on Fortune's 40 Under 40 list. The accompanying article had praised his singular focus and uncompromising dedication to his vision, euphemisms for the personal sacrifices that had propelled his success. A soft sound from the doorway made him turn. Lily stood there in her rumpled clothes, her amber eyes solemn in the dim light. I got scared, she said simply. I didn't know where you were. Something twisted in Alexander's chest. I'm right here, he said, his voice gentler than he could remember it being in years. You should be sleeping. Lily padded across the room in sock feet and climbed onto the leather sofa against the wall. Mom said you make computers talk to each other better. Alexander blinked, surprised by this remarkably accurate simplification of his company's primary innovation, an adaptive communication protocol that had revolutionized network efficiency. Yes, he said, sitting beside her. That's basically what I do. Lily nodded as if confirming something important. She kept all the magazine pictures of you. She said you were changing the world. Alexander swallowed hard. Your mom, she was very smart. The smartest, Lily agreed solemnly. She taught us all to read when we were 4. Lucas is the best at math. Layla draws amazing pictures. Liam remembers every fact he ever hears. Logan can build anything with Legos. She looked up at him expectantly. What can you do besides computers? The question caught him off guard. Outside of business, Alexander's life was remarkably empty of hobbies or personal pursuits. I play chess, he offered finally. And I can fly helicopters, Lily's eyes widened. Real ones. Real ones, he confirmed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Can you teach us? When you're older, he found himself promising. Much older. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, this strange little person and the father who hadn't known she existed until hours ago. Are you really going to let us stay? Lily asked finally, her voice smaller than before. Alexander looked down at her, this child with his eyes and Sophia's delicate features, and felt the weight of her question. Yes, he said, surprised by how certain he felt. But it's complicated. There are legal things that need to happen. Lily considered this. Because Aunt Rebecca is our guardian on the papers. Alexander nodded, impressed by her understanding. She doesn't want us, Lily said with the brutal honesty of childhood. She said we're too expensive and too much work. She only took us because she had to. Before Alexander could respond, the security system chimed, announcing Eleanor's arrival. At the gate, Lily tensed at the sound. It's okay, Alexander assured her. That's my lawyer. She's going to help us figure everything out. Lily's small hand found his, her fingers curling trustingly around his much larger ones. Don't let her separate us, she whispered. We belong together. The conviction in her voice struck Alexander to his core. I won't, he promised. Eleanor Blackwood, immaculately dressed despite the late hour, took in the situation with the calm efficiency that had made her Alexander's most valued advisor. Her sharp eyes catalogued the sleeping children in the guest bedroom before she joined Alexander in the kitchen for a hushed conference. "DNA testing is our first priority," she began without preamble, accepting the coffee Alexander offered, followed by emergency temporary custody petition. "We'll need to contact the aunt, but on our terms." "What are the chances," Alexander asked bluntly, "of keeping them together, of keeping them with me?" Eleanor considered him thoughtfully. In 15 years she had never seen Alexander Reed uncertain about anything. Honestly? The fact that you're their biological father gives you an advantage. Your resources are obviously substantial, but courts prioritize stability, and you're a single man with no parenting experience and a notorious workaholic schedule. Alexander flinched slightly at the assessment. "The aunt wanting to separate them works in our favor," Eleanor continued. "No judge likes to split up siblings, especially multiples, but you'll need to demonstrate a significant lifestyle change to accommodate children. The legal battle could be lengthy." "Cost is no object," Alexander said automatically. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "This isn't about money, Alexander. It's about convincing a family court that a man who routinely works 100-hour weeks can adequately parent 5-6-year-olds. The magnitude of the challenge ahead settled over him. "I'll make whatever changes necessary, starting with your Singapore call-in." Eleanor checked her watch. 3 hours. Alexander had completely forgotten about the 4 a.m. conference that could potentially expand Reed Technologies into Asian markets. "I'll reschedule," he decided. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "In 15 years, I've never seen you postpone a business meeting, not even when you had pneumonia last year." Alexander's gaze drifted toward the hallway leading to the guest bedroom. Things change. By dawn, Eleanor had set the legal machinery in motion. A private lab would arrive in the morning for DNA testing. Emergency custody paperwork was being prepared. A private investigator was gathering information on Rebecca Wilson and the circumstances of Sophia's death. "What about tomorrow?" Alexander asked as Eleanor prepared to leave. "They need things, clothes, food, whatever children need." For the first time that night, Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. "I'll have my assistant arrange for essentials to be delivered, but Alexander, you should call Megan." "My sister? Why?" "Because she has 3 children of her own. And because you haven't spoken to her in nearly 2 years, which is exactly the kind of family estrangement a family court judge would frown upon." Alexander winced at the accuracy of her assessment. His relationship with his younger sister had deteriorated after their parents' death, his immersion in work creating a gulf between them that neither had attempted to bridge. After Eleanor left, Alexander stood at the wall of windows, watching the first pale light of dawn illuminate the lake. Behind him, the quintuplets slept on, unaware of the machinery now in motion on their behalf. His phone buzzed with a notification about the Singapore call. With a decisive gesture, Alexander typed a brief message to his COO. "Need to reschedule. Family emergency. Handle initial negotiations." He hesitated before adding, "This takes priority." The sun had fully risen when Alexander heard movement from the guest bedroom. He turned to find all 5 quintuplets watching him from the hallway, their identical faces serious in the morning light. "Are we in trouble?" Lucas asked directly, his protective stance indicating he was prepared to shield his siblings if necessary. "No," Alexander assured them. "But we need to talk about what happens next." He guided them to the kitchen, where he attempted to prepare breakfast with his limited culinary skills. As he served slightly overdone scrambled eggs, Alexander outlined the immediate future in terms he hoped they could understand. My lawyer is helping us make everything legal, he explained. There will be a test today to prove I'm your father, even though we already know I am. Will we have to see Aunt Rebecca? Layla asked, fear evident in her voice. Eventually, but not right away, Alexander answered honestly. And you won't go with her. You'll stay together, and you'll stay with me. Promise. Logan's voice was barely audible. Alexander met each pair of amber eyes in turn. I promise. As the quintuplets ate, Alexander observed their interactions, the subtle signals that passed between them, the way they compensated for each other's needs without speaking. There was something extraordinary about their connection, a bond he, in good sense but not fully comprehend. We need to get you some clothes and other things, he continued. They'll be delivered today. Is there anything special you need right away? The quintuplets exchanged glances, one of their silent communications. Our memory box, Lily finally answered. It's at Aunt Rebecca's house. It has Mum's letters and our special things. Alexander nodded, adding this to his mental list. We'll get it. For now, we should call your aunt so she knows you're safe. 5 faces registered alarm simultaneously. She'll make us go back, Lucas said, voicing their collective fear. No, she won't, Alexander assured them with more confidence than he felt. I'm your father. You belong with me now. As he spoke the words, Alexander realized how completely he meant them. In less than 24 hours, these 5 children had upended his carefully ordered existence, yet he could no longer imagine a reality where they weren't part of his life. Outside, the sun sparkled on the lake waters, illuminating a new day. Unlike any Alexander Reed had ever faced, the first day of being a father to 5 extraordinary children who had crossed miles to find him. The call to Rebecca Wilson went about as well as Alexander had expected. They're where? Her voice, amplified, through the speakerphone, vibrated with a mixture of fury and relief. With who? They're with me, Alexander repeated calmly, aware of 5 sets of eyes watching him from across the kitchen. Their father. A bitter laugh crackled through the speaker. So now you decide to show up 7 years too late? Ms. Wilson, I've only just learned of their existence, Alexander explained, maintaining his composure. Sophia never told me she was pregnant. That's not how she told it, Rebecca countered. She said you made it clear children weren't part of your grand plan. Alexander winced, remembering the conversation Sophia had overheard. There was a misunderstanding, one I never had the chance to clarify. Well, congratulations on your convenient awakening to fatherhood, Rebecca said sarcastically. But those children are legally in my custody. I'm calling the police. Alexander had anticipated this. Before you do that, you should know that my lawyer has already filed for emergency custody based on biological paternity. We've also documented your intention to separate the quintuplets, which no family court will look favorably upon. A tense silence followed. They need to come home, Rebecca finally said, her voice slightly less hostile. Their school, their things. They've made their choice pretty clear, Alexander interrupted. They traveled for days to find me, Ms. Wilson. Because Sophia filled their heads with fantasies about their absent father, Rebecca snapped. She never accepted that you'd abandoned them. I didn't abandon them, Alexander insisted. I didn't know they existed. The quintuplets exchanged glances at this, their expressions solemn. Let me speak to them, Rebecca demanded. Alexander looked to the children, raising an eyebrow in question. Lucas shook his head firmly, but Lily stood and approached the phone. Hi, Aunt Rebecca, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her small shoulders. Lily, are you all right? Are your brothers and sister with you? We're all fine, Lily confirmed. We found our dad. We're staying with him now. Sweetie, you need to come home. This isn't... We don't want to be split up, Lily interrupted, a surprising firmness in her young voice. You said we had to go to different families. Another Silence, this one telling. That was for your own good, Rebecca finally said. 5 children is too much for anyone home. Alexander stepped closer to the phone. Not for me, he stated with quiet conviction. They stay together, Ms. Wilson, with their father. You have no idea what you're getting into, Rebecca warned. 5, 6-year-olds, with your lifestyle, you'll be begging for relief within a week. Then I'll hire help, Alexander countered, but I won't separate them. The call ended with an uneasy truce. Rebecca agreed not to contact authorities immediately, pending an in-person meeting the following day. In return, Alexander promised to bring the quintuplets to her house to collect their belongings, including the mysterious memory box they had mentioned. The DNA testing team arrived mid-morning, a discreet private service that Eleanor had arranged. The process was simple, just cheek swabs for all 6 of them, but the children watched with solemn fascination. Will it hurt? Layla asked, eyeing the collection tubes with apprehension. Not at all, the technician assured her with a practiced smile. It's just like brushing your teeth with a tiny brush. As predicted, the procedure was painless, though Logan still clung to Alexander's hand throughout his turn. The gesture of trust touched Alexander in a way he hadn't expected. Results in 24 hours, the technician informed them as he packed up his equipment, though given the resemblance, I'd say it's a formality. After the testing team departed, delivery trucks began arriving with the essentials Eleanor's assistant had ordered. Children's clothing in appropriate sizes, toiletries, bedding, even a selection of toys and books. The quintuplets watched wide-eyed as packages were carried in, clearly unused to such abundance. All of this is for us? Liam asked, his voice tinged with disbelief as he examined a set of new clothing. You need things, Alexander said simply, something tightening in his chest at their reaction to what he considered basic necessities. While the children explored their new possessions, Alexander stepped onto the deck to make a call he'd been avoiding. His sister answered on the 3rd ring. Alexander. Megan's voice held surprise and a hint of wariness. Is everything okay? Not exactly, he admitted, watching the quintuplets through the window as they excitedly examined their new belongings. I need your help, Meg. The use of her childhood nickname, something he hadn't said in years, created a momentary silence. What's wrong? The wariness had been replaced by concern. I just discovered I have children, Alexander said, the words still strange on his tongue. 5 of them. Quintuplets. You... what? Alexander explained the situation as concisely as possible. Sophia's pregnancy, the misunderstanding, the children's journey to find him, and his determination to keep them together. They're 6 years old, Meg. I don't know the first thing about... Children, I need your guidance. Another long pause followed. I never thought I'd hear Alexander Reed admit he needed help with anything, Megan finally said, a note of wonder in her voice. Things change, Alexander replied, echoing his words to Eleanor. How far are you from Boston? About 2 hours. I'll be there this afternoon, Megan decided, with reinforcements. After ending the call, Alexander turned to find Lucas standing in the doorway, observing him with that unnervingly direct gaze. Who were you talking to? The boy asked, his protective instincts evident. My sister, Alexander answered. Your Aunt Megan. She's coming to help us get settled. Lucas processed this. Mom said you didn't have family. Alexander winced. I do. We just haven't been close. That's going to change. Because of us? Because it's time, Alexander corrected gently. Sometimes people need a push to fix things they've been avoiding. Lucas seemed to accept this, though his analytical gaze suggested he was filing away the information for future consideration. Why don't you look surprised? The boy asked suddenly. About us, about being our dad? The question caught Alexander off guard. I am surprised, he assured him. More surprised than I've ever been. But you're not freaking out, Lucas persisted. Aunt Rebecca said most men would freak out if 5 kids showed up. Alexander considered the question seriously. I build systems for a living, Lucas. Complex networks that have to adapt to unexpected challenges. When problems arise, panicking doesn't solve anything. You assess, adjust, and move forward. To his surprise, Lucas nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. That's what Mom always said. Assess, adjust, advance. When we had problems at school, the echo of Sophia's words transformed into a life philosophy she had passed. To their children struck Alexander deeply. He had missed so much, but pieces of him and her lived in these extraordinary children. Your mother was a wise woman, he said softly. The smartest, Lucas agreed, unconsciously echoing Lily's words from the previous night. Around noon, Alexander received a call from his COO, Bradley Parker, about the postponed Singapore negotiations. Everything okay, boss? Bradley asked, genuine concern in his voice. You've never missed a key negotiation in the 15 years I've known you. Family situation, Alexander replied, watching as Lily helped Layla arrange her new clothes in careful piles. I need to stay focused here for now. Anything I can do? Alexander considered the question. Actually, yes. I need you to prepare the leadership team for some significant changes. I'll be working remotely indefinitely and delegating more day-to-day operations. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Are you stepping down? Bradley finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. Restructuring, Alexander clarified. Not leaving. I'll explain everything soon. After hanging up, Alexander made a decision. Gathering the quintuplets in the living room, he positioned himself in front of them. I need to show you something, he said, activating the large wall screen that dominated one wall of the living room. A few commands on his tablet brought up a series of photographs, his company headquarters, the executive team, various innovation, awards. This is Reed Technologies, he explained. The company I built. It's been the center of my life for 15 years. 5 identical faces watched attentively as he navigated through images of his professional life. Being the CEO, the boss, means I've always been very busy, Alexander continued. I've worked long hours, traveled constantly, and rarely taken time off. Are you going to be too busy for us? Layla asked, voicing the fear before he could address it. Alexander shook his head firmly. No. That's what I'm trying to explain. Things are going to change. The company will still be important, but it won't be the only important thing anymore. You 5 are my priority now. The quintuplets exchanged glances, one of their silent communications passing between them. You might get bored of us, Logan said softly, his small voice carrying a weight of insecurity. Alexander crouched to their level, meeting their eyes. That's not possible. You're my children. Nothing is more important than that. Aunt Rebecca said men like you don't change, Lily observed, studying his face for confirmation or denial. Sometimes people change when they find something more important than what they had before, Alexander said carefully. I've built machines and companies, but family, that's something I never built. I think maybe I forgot how important it is. Before any of them could respond, the security system announced an approaching vehicle. The camera feed showed a minivan coming up the driveway, a vehicle type Alexander would have sworn never existed on his property before. That's your Aunt Megan, he told the quintuplets, feeling a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. The woman who emerged from the minivan was clearly Alexander's sister, the same amber eyes and dark hair, though hers was cut in a practical bob. Behind her, 3 children tumbled out of the vehicle, a girl about 12 and 2 boys around 9 and 7. Alexander's nieces and nephews, whom he had seen only in Christmas cards for the past 2 years. As they approached the front door, Alexander felt Lucas move closer to him, a subtle gesture of support that touched him deeply. Together, they went to greet the family Alexander had allowed to drift away. the first step in building the new reality that 5 unexpected children had brought into his life. The initial meeting between the quintuplets and their newfound cousins was a study in contrasts. Alexander's niece, Zoe, immediately took charge with the confidence of an eldest child, introducing her brothers Mason and Tyler with practiced ease. The quintuplets, meanwhile, maintained their tight formation. 5 identical faces regarding these new children with cautious curiosity. "So, you're all the same age?" Zoe asked, studying the quintuplets with fascination. "That's so cool. Can you read each other's minds?" "No," Lucas answered seriously. "But we know when one of us is upset. Even when we're in different rooms," Lily added. Alexander stood awkwardly beside his sister, the years of distance between them palpable. Megan looked different from his memories, more settled, with laugh lines around her eyes he didn't recall. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, as the children began to tentatively interact. Megan's expression softened. "You said you needed help. That's not something I ever expected to hear from my big brother. I've never had quintuplets before," Alexander replied, attempting humor to bridge the gap between them. "You've never had anyone before," Megan corrected gently. "Not since Sarah died." The mention of their mother, gone 10 years now, brought a familiar ache. Sarah Reed had been the family's emotional center, the one who brought warmth to their analytically minded household. After her death from cancer when Alexander was 25 and Megan 20, they had drifted apart, each coping with grief in their own way. Alexander had buried himself in building Reed Technologies, while Megan had created the family he had avoided. "I've made mistakes," Alexander acknowledged, the admission easier than he had expected. "We both have," Megan conceded, "but these children need you, and maybe you need them too." Inside, Megan assessed the lake house with a practiced eye. "Beautiful but completely not child-proofed," she declared, "and definitely not set up for 5 active 6-year-olds. She moved through the space with efficiency, making notes on her phone. "You'll need safety locks on these cabinets, gates for the stairs, covers for the electrical outlets. The glass coffee table has to go, too many sharp corners. And that deck railing spacing is definitely not up to code for children." Alexander followed, slightly overwhelmed by the list of modifications his pristine modernist retreat would require. "I'll hire contractors immediately," he assured her. Megan raised an eyebrow. "That's your solution to everything, isn't it? Throw money at problems?" The comment stung, but Alexander couldn't deny its accuracy. "What would you suggest?" "Start by understanding what these children need beyond physical safety," Megan advised. "They've lost their mother, been threatened with separation, and now they're with a father they've never known. Security isn't just about child-proof cabinets." Alexander nodded, absorbing her wisdom. "That's why I called you." By mid-afternoon, the house had transformed. The children had naturally divided into play groups, with Zoe taking Lily and Layla under her wing, showing them how to braid each other's hair. Mason and Tyler had enlisted Lucas, Liam and Logan in constructing an elaborate fort from sofa cushions and throw blankets, a structure that now dominated the formerly pristine living room. Alexander watched from the kitchen as Megan prepared a proper meal, having declared his refrigerator a bachelor wasteland. "They seem to be getting along," he observed, noting how the quintuplets had relaxed in the presence of their cousins. "Children adapt," Megan replied, skillfully chopping vegetables. "You could learn from them." "I'm trying," Alexander said with unusual humility. Megan paused her food preparation, studying her brother. "You know, when you called, I expected to find you panicking or already regretting your decision. Why? Because the Alexander I've known for the past decade doesn't make room for anything but work," she said bluntly. "The man who missed my wedding because of a product launch. Who's met my children exactly twice in their lives." Alexander winced at the accuracy of her assessment. "I've been focused," Obsessed, Megan corrected. Ever since Mom died, you've poured everything into that company. Like if you could just build something big enough, it would fill the hole she left. The insight struck uncomfortably close to home. Maybe you're right, Alexander conceded, but these children, they change things. Megan's expression softened. I can see that. You look at them differently than you look at anything else, even your precious tech innovations. Their conversation was interrupted by Eleanor's arrival. The attorney took in the transformed living room with raised eyebrows, but made no comment as she joined them in the kitchen. The emergency custody petition has been filed, she reported. I've also been in contact with Rebecca Wilson's attorney. They're pushing back, but we have strong arguments on our side. What are our chances? Alexander asked directly. Better than they were this morning, Eleanor responded. I've secured a preliminary hearing for tomorrow. The judge wants to see the children and assess the situation quickly. Tomorrow. Megan interjected. That's unusually fast, Eleanor nodded. Judge Martinez has a reputation for prioritizing children's immediate welfare. The fact that Rebecca was planning to separate the quintuplets raised significant concerns. We're still going to Rebecca's house as planned? Alexander confirmed. Yes, but I'll accompany you, Eleanor advised. Keep things civil, focus on collecting the children's belongings. The memory box they mentioned could be legally significant if it contains documentation from Sophia. As they discussed strategy, Alexander noticed Logan watching them from the doorway, his expression troubled. Excusing himself, Alexander approached, the quietest of the quintuplets. Everything okay? He asked, crouching to the boy's level. Logan fidgeted with the hem of his new shirt. Are we in trouble? Because we ran away? Alexander shook his head. No, you were very brave to find me. But there are rules about where children can live, and we need to follow those rules to make sure you can stay with me. Logan digested this. Information. Will we have to talk to a judge? Probably, Alexander answered honestly, but I'll be right there with you. What if we say something wrong? Alexander placed a gentle hand on Logan's shoulder. Just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask of you. The boy's amber eyes, so like Alexander's own, studied him carefully. Aunt Rebecca said you wouldn't want us because we're too much work. But you don't seem to think we're too much work. Something tightened in Alexander's chest. You're not work, Logan. You're my children. A small smile flickered across the boy's face before he hurried back to the fort construction, apparently satisfied with Alexander's answer. Dinner was a boisterous affair, with 9 children and 3 adults gathered. Around Alexander's rarely used dining table, Megan had prepared a simple meal of pasta and vegetables, which the quintuplets approached with surprising manners. You 5 have excellent table habits, Megan observed. Mum said good manners show respect, Lily explained, and to always be grateful for what we have. Alexander noticed that before eating, each quintuplet had taken precisely the same portion, waiting until everyone was served before beginning, a habit born of sharing limited resources. It was another glimpse into the life they had lived with Sophia, a life of care and values, if not material abundance. After dinner, Megan orchestrated a bath rotation with practiced efficiency, showing Alexander how to help with shampooing and detangling hair, skills he had never imagined needing. The quintuplets emerged in new pajamas, their identical faces glowing from hot water and excitement. "Where are we sleeping tonight?" Liam asked, as bath time concluded. Alexander hesitated, realizing he hadn't thought through sleeping arrangements beyond the temporary solution of the previous night. "You can all sleep in the big guest room again for tonight," he suggested. "Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent." "We like sleeping together," Lily informed him. "But Lucas kicks sometimes." "I do not," Lucas protested, though the familiar way the siblings bickered suggested this was a long-standing debate. As bedtime approached, the quintuplets gathered in the living room, looking expectantly at Alexander. Mom always read us a story before bed, Layla explained, her voice soft but direct. Alexander glanced helplessly at Megan, who nodded encouragingly toward the stack of children's books that had been delivered earlier. Selecting one at random, something about a rabbit family. Alexander settled on the sofa, surprised when all 5 children arranged themselves around him, finding spaces against his sides and even on his lap. Their easy physical affection caught him off guard. In his adult life, Alexander had maintained careful personal space with everyone. He began reading awkwardly, but soon found a rhythm, especially when the quintuplets began to predict favorite lines or ask questions about the illustrations. By the story's end, Alexander realized he had enjoyed the experience more than he had anticipated. "One more," Lily requested hopefully. "Tomorrow," Alexander promised. "It's late, and we have an important day ahead." Leading them to the guest bedroom, Alexander watched as they arranged themselves in the king-sized bed with practiced coordination. Layla and Lily in the middle, the boys forming a protective perimeter around them. "Will you be here when we wake up?" Logan asked, the question revealing a fear Alexander hadn't recognized until that moment. "I'll be right down the hall," he assured them. "I'm not going anywhere." After turning out the light, Alexander lingered in the doorway, watching 5 nearly identical silhouettes settle into sleep. The enormity of what had happened, of what was still happening, washed over him. Yesterday, he had been alone, focused solely on his business empire. Today, he was responsible for 5 small lives that depended on him completely. Returning to the living room, he found Megan clearing away the last of the day's disorder. "Your niece and nephews are asleep in the blue bedroom," she informed him. "I hope you don't mind us staying the night." "Of course not," Alexander assured her, realizing he was genuinely grateful for her presence. "I'm not sure I could have handled today without you." Megan's expression softened. "That's what family does, Alexander. We show up for each other, even when it's been too long since we last did." The gentle rebuke carried no real sting. "I've missed a lot, haven't I?" Alexander said quietly. "Yes," Megan acknowledged, "but you're here now, and those 5 extraordinary children are giving you a second chance to remember what matters." As night settled over the lake house, Alexander stood at the window, watching. The moonlight on the water. Behind him, the home he had designed for solitude now held 9 sleeping children and the beginning of reconnection with his sister. The irony wasn't lost on him, that in his pursuit of building a technological empire, he had neglected to build what might matter most: a family. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. The DNA results had arrived early, 99.99999% probability of paternity, confirmed for all 5 children. Alexander had never doubted it, not from the moment he had seen 5 pairs of identical amber eyes, his eyes looking back at him from his car. Tomorrow would bring legal battles and difficult conversations. But tonight, Alexander Reed, billionaire, CEO and newly discovered father of quintuplets, allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The drive to Rebecca Wilson's house the next morning was tense. Alexander had arranged for Megan to stay with her children at the lake house, while he and Eleanor accompanied the quintuplets. The children sat quietly in the back of the SUV Eleanor had arranged, a vehicle far more practical than Alexander's. "Sports car for transporting 5 children. Remember," Eleanor cautioned as they approached the modest suburban neighborhood, "keep the interaction brief and focused on collecting belongings. Avoid arguments about custody or the past." Alexander nodded, his attention divided between her advice and the rearview mirror, where he could see the quintuplets huddled together, their faces solemn as they recognized their old neighborhood. "That's Mrs. Patterson's house," Lily narrated, softly as they passed a blue bungalow. "She used to watch us sometimes when Mom had night shifts." And that's where Mr. Jenkins lives, Liam added, pointing to a well-maintained yard with a maple tree. He lets us pick up the maple seeds in fall. These glimpses into their previous life, a life Alexander had no part in, created a peculiar ache in his chest. They had an entire history he knew nothing about, filled with people and memories he had missed. Rebecca's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a modest two-story with a small front yard. As they pulled into the driveway, Alexander noticed how the quintuplets tensed simultaneously, their identical postures reflecting shared apprehension. "It's going to be okay," he assured them, meeting 5 pairs of amber eyes in the mirror. "We're just getting your things, and then we're leaving together." The front door opened before they had fully exited the vehicle. Rebecca Wilson stood on the porch, arms crossed defensively over her chest. She was a thin woman in her early 40s, with streaks of premature grey in her light brown hair and shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes. Behind her stood a man in a suit, who Alexander presumed was her attorney. "Children," Rebecca called, her voice softening as the quintuplets emerged from the SUV. "I've been so worried." None of the quintuplets ran to greet her, Alexander noted. Instead, they formed their characteristic tight formation, with Lucas slightly in front of his siblings. "Hello, Aunt Rebecca," they chorused with careful politeness. Rebecca's gaze shifted to Alexander, her expression hardening. "So you're the famous Alexander Reed." Sophia certainly had a type, brilliant, ambitious, and completely self-absorbed. "Ms. Wilson," Eleanor intervened smoothly, "we're here solely to collect the children's belongings as agreed. This isn't the time for personal discussions." Rebecca's attorney stepped forward, introducing himself as David Markowitz. "We've prepared the children's essential items," he stated professionally. "However, we want to be clear that this cooperation doesn't constitute any acknowledgement of Mr. Reed's custody claims." "Understood," Eleanor replied with equal formality. "The court will determine those matters tomorrow." As they entered the house, Alexander was struck by how different it felt from his modernist retreat. Rebecca's home was modest but warmly decorated, with photographs covering the walls and evidence of children everywhere, artwork taped to the refrigerator, a homework station in the dining room, small shoes lined up by the door. "The children's room is upstairs," Rebecca directed, leading the way. "They've shared the converted attic since they were 3. The space she led them to was larger than Alexander had expected, a renovated attic with 5 small beds arranged in a star pattern, the points radiating from a central play area. Each bed had different colored bedding, apparently the only concession to individuality in a space designed for 5 identical children. "Purple is mine," Lily explained, seeing Alexander's gaze linger on the beds. "Blue is Lucas's, green is Liam's, yellow is Layla's, and red is Logan's." Rebecca had already packed clothing into 5 identical duffel bags, each color-coded to match the beds. "I've included their school things and favorite clothes," she said stiffly. "Their medications are in the front pockets." "Medications?" Alexander questioned, immediately concerned. "Just allergies," Lucas explained. "Liam and I get hay fever. Logan has asthma sometimes." Another detail Alexander hadn't known, health concerns he should have been aware of as their father. The realization deepened his determination to learn everything about these 5 extraordinary children as quickly as possible. "Where's our memory box?" Lily asked, looking around the room. Rebecca's expression tightened. "In my closet for safekeeping. I'll get it." While she disappeared down the hall, the quintuplets moved through their room with practiced efficiency, each collecting specific treasures. A favorite book here, a special toy there. Alexander observed that they took very little, only items of obvious personal significance. "Don't you want to bring more toys?" he asked, noticing how sparse their selections were. Layla shook her head. "These are our special ones, the ones Mom gave us." Rebecca returned carrying a wooden box with a carved lid. It was clearly handmade, with 5 intertwined trees etched into the surface. Her grip on it seemed reluctant as she handed it to Lily. "Your mother wanted you to have this when you were older," she said, her voice softer than before. "It has letters and keepsakes she saved for each of you." Lily accepted the box reverently, holding it against her chest with both arms. "Thank you for keeping it safe." As they prepared to leave, Alexander noticed a collection of framed photographs on the wall beside the stairs. Images of Sophia, with the quintuplets at various ages. He paused, studying the face of the woman who had borne his children without. His knowledge, Sophia looked different than he remembered. More mature, certainly, but with a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there during their relationship. In each photo, however, she beamed with undisguised love at the 5 identical children surrounding her. "She never stopped hoping you'd find them," Rebecca said quietly, having noticed his attention to the photographs, "even when I told her to move on." Alexander turned to face her, sensing an opportunity for understanding despite Eleanor's warning. To avoid personal conversations. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, keeping his voice low enough that the children now gathering their bags couldn't hear. Rebecca's expression was complex. Anger mingled with something that might have been regret. "She overheard you telling that investor that a family would derail your grand plans. Then when she tried to call you afterward, your number had changed. I got a new secure line after a business security issue," Alexander explained. "But I kept my personal number, not the one she had," Rebecca countered. "And when she wrote to your office, the letters came back marked return to sender." Alexander frowned. "That's impossible. I've had the same office for 15 years. A D." Strange expression crossed Rebecca's face. "She sent them to Reed Technologies on Parker Street." "Parker Street," Alexander echoed. "We've never had an office there. Our headquarters has always been on Technology Square." Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. "That's not the address she had." She hesitated before adding, "The return address came from information I found for her." Something clicked in Alexander's mind. "You looked up my company's address for her?" "Yes," Rebecca admitted. "After she couldn't reach you by phone, I found a business directory listing." Alexander exchanged glances with Eleanor, whose sharp legal mind had clearly made the same connection he had. "Miss Wilson," Eleanor said carefully, "what year was this business directory published?" Rebecca frowned. "I don't remember exactly. It was an old one from the library reference section. Was it perhaps from around the time Reed Technologies was first founded?" Eleanor pressed. Maybe." It seemed official. Alexander felt a cold realization settle over him. "Parker Street was our first incubator location for less than 6 months during the company's launch. We moved to Technology Square 15 years ago, before I even met Sophia." Rebecca's face drained of color. "That's not possible. I had the right information." "Did you ever try to contact Alexander directly yourself?" Eleanor asked, her tone professionally neutral despite the implications. "Why would I?" Rebecca demanded. "Sophia tried multiple times. He clearly didn't want to be found." The quintuplets had finished gathering their belongings and now stood watching this exchange with solemn interest. Alexander could see Lucas processing every word, his analytical mind clearly drawing conclusions. "Did you check if the address was current?" the boy asked suddenly, his question cutting through the tension with childlike directness. Rebecca turned to him, startled. It was a published directory." "But businesses move," Lucas persisted with the logic of a child. "Mum's hospital moved 2 years ago to a new building. Everyone had to update their information." A faint flush crept up Rebecca's neck. "We should finish getting your things," she said abruptly, turning away from Lucas's too perceptive gaze. As they collected the last of the children's belongings, Alexander noticed a manila envelope on the hall table, official-looking papers, spilling from its confines. He caught a glimpse of letterhead from Westside Adoption Services before Rebecca hastily tucked the papers back into the envelope. The adoption arrangements, Alexander surmised quietly. Rebecca met his gaze defiantly. 5 children is too much for one household. I did what I thought was necessary. Separating them was never necessary, Alexander stated firmly. Says the billionaire with unlimited resources, Rebecca shot back. Try raising 5 identical children on a teacher's salary with no support, then judge me. Before Alexander could respond, Eleanor placed a warning hand on his arm. We should go, she murmured. The hearing is in 3 hours. As they prepared to leave, Alexander noticed the quintuplets saying goodbye to their bedroom, each touching their colored bed one last time. Despite his issues with Rebecca, he recognized that this had been their home for the past 3 weeks since Sophia's death, and likely a frequent place of comfort throughout their lives. At the front door, the quintuplets paused to say goodbye to their aunt. Despite the tension between the adults, Alexander noted that they approached her with genuine, if reserved, affection. Will we see you again? Lily asked, expressing the question Alexander sensed was on all their minds. Rebecca knelt to their level, her expression softening. Of course you will. No matter what happens in court, I'm still your aunt. As they loaded the children's belongings into the SUV, Rebecca approached Alexander, while the quintuplets were distracted by Eleanor showing them how to properly buckle their seatbelts. I may have made mistakes, she admitted, her voice low and strained, but I loved my sister and I love those children. I believe you, Alexander replied honestly, but separating them was wrong. Rebecca's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I was drowning, trying to care for 5 children while grieving my sister. The adoption agency promised excellent homes, proper vetting. They would have had opportunities. I couldn't provide. They would have lost each other, Alexander countered, and after losing their mother, that would have been cruel. Rebecca looked away. Perhaps. But what happens when you realize that 5 children don't fit into your executive lifestyle? What then, Mr. Reed? Then I change my lifestyle, Alexander answered without hesitation. Not their family. As they drove away, Alexander watched the quintuplets in the rearview mirror. They sat quietly, the memory box secured carefully between Lily and Lucas. 5 identical profiles stared out the windows at the neighborhood they were leaving behind, a neighborhood filled with memories of their mother and their early childhood. Are you okay? Alexander asked, breaking the silence. 5 heads turned toward him simultaneously, an eerie synchronicity that still caught him off guard. We're together, Lucas answered simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps, Alexander realized, it did. These 5 extraordinary children had fought to stay together, crossing miles and taking enormous risks to find a father they'd never met. Their bond with each other was the foundation of their world, a world that now somehow included him. As they drove toward the courthouse and the hearing that would determine their future, Alexander felt a fierce determination building within him. He might have missed the first 6 years of their lives, but he would not miss another day. Whatever it took, legal battles, lifestyle changes, a complete reinvention of his priorities, these 5 children would remain together, and they would remain with him. The family court building was imposing, all marble columns and heavy wooden doors designed to lend gravity to the proceedings within. Alexander straightened his tie, nervously, acutely aware that he was more comfortable in corporate boardrooms than courthouses. You okay? Eleanor asked, observing his restless adjustments. Fine, Alexander replied automatically, then reconsidered. Actually, no. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than I'm feeling right now. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. That's because those deals didn't matter as much as this does. Inside the SUV, the quintuplets sat quietly, dressed in their best clothing from among the new items Alexander had purchased. Lily smoothed her purple dress repeatedly, a nervous gesture mirrored by Layla with her yellow cardigan. The boys sat unnaturally still, their usually active bodies held in check by the significance of the occasion. "Will the judge be mean?" Logan asked softly as they prepared to exit the vehicle. Alexander crouched beside the open door, meeting the boys' worried gaze. "No, the judge just wants to make sure you're safe and happy. That's her job." "And she'll let us stay with you?" Liam pressed. "I hope so," Alexander answered honestly. "That's what we're here to ask her." In the courthouse lobby, they were met by a social worker named Ms. Garcia, who would interview the children separately before the hearing. Her kind face and gentle manner seemed to put the quintuplets at ease. "I'll just be asking about your lives with your mom, with your aunt, and what you think about living with your dad," she explained, crouching to their level. "There are no wrong answers. Just tell me the truth, okay?" 5 solemn nods answered her. Alexander squeezed each child's shoulder reassuringly as they followed Ms. Garcia to a conference room, leaving him and Eleanor in the hallway with their thoughts. "What are our chances?" Alexander asked, once the children were out of earshot. Eleanor considered the question carefully. The DNA confirmation helps significantly. The fact that Rebecca planned to separate them works strongly in our favor. "Your resources are obviously substantial." She paused. "The biggest hurdle is demonstrating your ability to adapt your lifestyle to parenting." Alexander nodded, understanding the challenge. His reputation as a driven workaholic was well established. "I've already initiated changes at the company. Bradley is taking over day-to-day operations, and I'm moving to a chairman role with flexible hours." "That's good," Eleanor acknowledged. "But the court will want to see evidence of stability in your personal arrangements as well. The lake house is beautiful but isolated and clearly not designed with children in mind." Alexander had anticipated this. "I've contacted a realtor about properties in good school districts, closer to Boston but with enough space for 5 active children. And I've arranged interviews with several highly recommended nannies." "All smart moves," Eleanor agreed. "But Judge Martinez will want to hear about your personal commitment, not just the hired help and logistics." Before Alexander could respond, the courtroom doors opened, and Rebecca emerged with her attorney. She looked more composed than she had at the house, dressed in a conservative navy dress that emphasized her role as an elementary school teacher. Her eyes met Alexander's briefly, before sliding away. "Rebecca," Alexander acknowledged with a polite nod. Deciding civility was the wisest approach. "Mr. Reed," she returned stiffly. Her attorney guided her to a bench further down the hall, maintaining the separation between the parties. The silence stretched uncomfortably until the conference room door opened, and Ms. Garcia emerged with the quintuplets. Alexander searched their faces for clues about the interview, but their expressions revealed little beyond the tension all of them were feeling. "The judge is ready for us," Ms. Garcia announced, leading the way into courtroom. Judge Martinez was not what Alexander had expected. Rather than the stern, older figure he had imagined, she was a woman in her mid-40s, with intelligent eyes and an air of no-nonsense efficiency. She observed the quintuplets with particular interest as they entered, her gaze noting their identical features and the way they moved in unconscious coordination. "Remarkable," she murmured, almost to herself, before calling the informal hearing to order. The proceedings began with statements from both attorneys. David Markowitz emphasized Rebecca's role in the children's lives from birth, her sisters, legal designation as their guardian, and the difficult financial circumstances that had led to the adoption considerations. Ms. Wilson made the best decision she could in an impossible situation, he concluded. She has been a constant presence in these children's lives, while Mr. Reed has been entirely absent until 3 days ago. Eleanor countered with the DNA confirmation, the revelation about the misdirected communications, and most significantly, the quintuplets' own actions in seeking out their father. These children risked everything to find Mr. Reed, she emphasized. Their determination to stay together and to connect with their biological father speaks volumes about their needs and desires. Judge Martinez listened attentively to both presentations before addressing Ms. Garcia. "Your assessment of the children?" she inquired. The social worker's report was concise but detailed. The quintuplets are remarkably well-adjusted considering their recent loss. They speak of their mother with love and clear memories. Their relationship with their aunt appears respectful but not deeply attached. Most significantly, they express a strong desire to remain together and to stay with their newly discovered father. "And what's your professional recommendation?" the judge pressed. "These children have suffered tremendous loss," Ms. Garcia replied. "Separating them would compound that trauma. Based on my interviews and observations, I believe they should remain together in a stable environment that can accommodate their unique needs as multiples." Judge Martinez nodded thoughtfully before turning her attention to the quintuplets, who sat in a perfect row beside Alexander. "I'd like to speak with the children now," she announced. "Not individually, as I understand. They function best together." The quintuplets approached the bench with remarkable composure for 6-year-olds. Judge Martinez smiled warmly at them, her formal demeanor softening. "I understand you've had quite an adventure finding your father," she began. Lucas, as usual, took the lead. "We found Mom's special box after the funeral. It had Dad's pictures and information. Aunt Rebecca was going to separate us, so we decided to find him ourselves." "That was a very brave decision," the judge observed, "and potentially dangerous. Weren't you afraid, traveling alone?" "We had each other," Lily explained, as if that made the danger irrelevant. "And Mom always said we were stronger together than apart." "Tell me about living with your aunt," Judge Martinez prompted gently. The quintuplets exchanged glances, their silent communication evident. "Aunt Rebecca tried," Layla offered quietly. "But she was sad about Mom, and we reminded her too much of Mom. She said 5 children was too many for one person," Liam added matter-of-factly. "That's why she found different families to adopt each of us." The judge's expression remained neutral, though Alexander noticed a subtle tightening around her eyes. "And how do you feel about living with your father, whom you just met?" "He promised not to separate us," Logan said simply, as if that were the only criterion that mattered. "He makes good pancakes," Liam contributed seriously. "He reads bedtime stories," Layla added. "He said he'll change his life to keep us, not change our family to fit his life," Lucas stated, quoting Alexander's words from the previous day with perfect recall. Judge Martinez smiled at this last comment before thanking the quintuplets and asking them to return to their seats. She then turned her attention to Rebecca. "Ms. Wilson, I understand the tremendous burden placed on you by your sister's passing. Caring for quintuplets would challenge anyone, particularly while grieving. Can you explain your decision to pursue separate adoptions?" Rebecca straightened in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Your Honor, I love my nieces and nephews, but on a teacher's salary, in a 3-bedroom house, with no partner or support system. The reality is, I simply couldn't provide adequately for all 5 of them. The adoption agency assured me they would find loving homes." "Did you consider that separating the children might cause significant emotional trauma?" Rebecca flinched slightly. "Of course I considered it, but I felt I had no viable alternatives." "Did you contact Mr. Reed directly before pursuing adoption?" the judge pressed. "No," Rebecca admitted. Based on Sophia's experience trying to reach him years ago, I assumed he wasn't interested in being involved. Thank you for your honesty, Judge Martinez said, before finally turning to Alexander. Alexander stood as she addressed him, years of boardroom protocol instinctively taking over. Mr. Reed, you've built one of the most successful technology companies in the country. Your work schedule, by all accounts, is demanding and all-consuming. How do you propose to care for 5, 6-year-olds while running a multi-billion-dollar corporation? It was the question Alexander had anticipated, yet the directness of it still caught him slightly off guard. He took a deep breath before answering. Your Honor, 3 days ago, I discovered I was a father, not just to one child, but to 5 extraordinary children who somehow found their way to me, despite overwhelming odds. That discovery has fundamentally changed everything about how I see my life and my priorities. He glanced at the quintuplets before continuing. I've already begun restructuring my company leadership to allow me to step back from day-to-day operations. I'm relocating to a home in a top school district. I'm arranging for qualified household help. He paused. But most importantly, I'm committed to being present for these children in ways I never prioritized in my professional life. That's quite a transformation in 3 days, the judge observed, though her tone wasn't dismissive. It is, Alexander acknowledged, but becoming a parent changes you. I've missed 6 years of their lives due to circumstances beyond my control. I refuse to miss another day because of choices within my control. Judge Martinez studied him thoughtfully. And if your business demands conflict with the children's needs, then the business will have to adapt, Alexander answered without hesitation. I built a company that revolutionized how systems communicate. Surely I can rebuild it to accommodate the most important people in my life. The judge nodded, seemingly satisfied with his response. She then asked a few specific questions about schooling plans, living arrangements, and Alexander's support system, areas he had discussed extensively with Eleanor in preparation. Finally, Judge Martinez called for a brief recess to consider her ruling. As they waited in the hallway, Alexander found himself too restless to sit. The quintuplets, sensing his anxiety, clustered around him in silent support. It's going to be okay, Lily assured him with a confidence that belied her 6 years. The judge could see we belong together. Alexander smiled down at her, touched by her attempt to comfort him when he should be reassuring her. I hope you're right. When they were called back into the courtroom, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling with measured clarity. This case presents unique circumstances, she began. 5 children who have lost their mother and discovered a father they never knew existed, a well-intentioned aunt with insufficient resources, and a father with abundant resources but no parenting experience. She looked directly at the quintuplets as she continued. The paramount consideration in any custody case is the best interest of the children. These remarkable children have demonstrated exceptional resilience and determination to stay together and to find their father. Their wishes, while not the only factor, carry significant weight. Alexander held his breath as she reached her decision. I am awarding temporary physical custody of the quintuplets to their biological father, Alexander Reed, for a probationary period of 3 months. During this time, Mr. Reed will demonstrate his ability to provide appropriate care, stability, and emotional support. Relief washed over Alexander, though he noted the temporary and probationary qualifications. Ms. Wilson will have regular visitation rights to be arranged between the parties, Judge Martinez continued. At the end of the 3-month period, the court will reassess the situation before making a final custody determination. She fixed Alexander with a direct gaze. Mr. Reed, this court is taking a chance on your commitment to these children. Prove that chance is well placed. I will, Your Honor, Alexander promised, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. As they exited the courtroom, the quintuplets' excitement was palpable, though they maintained remarkable decorum until reaching the privacy of the SUV. Once inside, their composure dissolved into relieved chatter and questions about what would happen next. "Does this mean we really get to stay with you?" Layla asked, her usually quiet voice animated with hope. "Yes," Alexander confirmed, his heart fuller than he could remember it being in years. "We're going to be a family." "For how long?" Logan, impressed, still seeking reassurance. Alexander met his son's anxious gaze directly. "Forever," he promised. "This is just the beginning." As they drove away from the courthouse, Alexander glanced in the rearview mirror at the 5 identical faces that had irrevocably changed his life in just 3 days. They were talking amongst themselves now, the tension of the hearing giving way to excited plans for their shared future. A future that, until they had appeared in his car with a simple note, Alexander had never imagined possible. The sprawling, colonial house in Brookline was alive with activity as decorations went up for the quintuplets' 7th birthday party. The spacious backyard had been transformed into a carnival wonderland with small game booths, a bouncy castle, and a stage. For the magic show scheduled later that afternoon, Alexander surveyed the organized chaos with a mixture of amazement and contentment. 6 months ago, his life had revolved entirely around board meetings and product launches. Today, it centered on 5 extraordinary children who had irrevocably changed his world. "The cake delivery just called," announced Maria, the warm-hearted nanny who had become an indispensable part of their household. "They're running 15 minutes late." "No problem," Alexander replied, checking his watch. "Guests won't arrive for another hour, and Megan has taken the kids for ice cream to keep them away until everything's ready." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of adaptation and growth. After the initial 3-month probationary period, Judge Martinez had awarded Alexander permanent custody, impressed by the dramatic life changes he had implemented. Reed Technologies now operated with a restructured leadership team that allowed Alexander to work primarily from home, with Bradley Parker handling day-to-day operations as the new CEO. Alexander had retained his position as chairman of the board, but his focus had shifted dramatically from constant growth to sustainable innovation that didn't require his around-the-clock attention. The quintuplets had flourished in their new environment, enrolled in a progressive private school that embraced their unique status as multiples while nurturing their individual strengths. They had quickly adapted to their new life. Lucas excelled in mathematics and science, Lily in leadership and communication, Layla in art and music, Liam in history and languages, and Logan in engineering and design. Alexander had learned to distinguish their subtle differences with growing ease. Lucas's analytical furrow when concentrating, Lily's hand gestures when excited, Layla's habit of humming when creating art, Liam's encyclopedic recitation of facts, and Logan's quiet observation before offering solutions. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Alexander opened the front door to find Rebecca Wilson standing on the porch, a stack of colorfully wrapped presents balanced in her arms. "Rebecca," he greeted her warmly. "Come in, you're early." "I thought I might help with preparations," she offered, stepping inside. The relationship between Alexander and Rebecca had evolved considerably over the past 6 months. The initial antagonism had gradually given way to a tentative cooperation, then eventually to a genuine respect, as both recognized the other's commitment to the quintuplets' welfare. "Megan took the kids for pre-birthday ice cream," Alexander explained, taking some of the packages. "They should be back any minute. How was your flight?" Rebecca had moved to Chicago for a teaching position 2 months earlier, but maintained, Regular video calls with the quintuplets and monthly in-person visits. On time for once, she replied, setting down the remaining presents. The house looks wonderful, Alexander. You've created a real home for them. There was no resentment in her voice now, just an acknowledgement of what they both knew to be true. Alexander had indeed transformed the formal colonial house into a vibrant family home, with colourful artwork adorning the walls, a massive playroom converted from the formal dining room, and 5 uniquely decorated bedrooms that reflected each child's emerging personality. "We all have," Alexander replied diplomatically. "They talk about your visits for weeks afterward." A commotion at the front door announced the quintuplets' return. They burst into the foyer with typical exuberance, only to stop short at the sight of their aunt. "Aunt Rebecca!" 5 voices cried in unison before they swarmed her with hugs and excited chatter. Alexander stepped back, exchanging a knowing glance with Megan, who had followed the children inside. The most significant change in the past 6 months hadn't been to his career or living arrangements, but to his understanding of family. The quintuplets needed all the love and support they could get, from him, from Rebecca, from Megan and her children. His initial territorial instincts had given way to the realization that these extraordinary children deserved an extensive support network. "Dad!" Lily called, breaking away from the group to tug at his hand. "Can we show Aunt Rebecca our memory?" A garden. The memory garden had been the quintuplets' idea, a special section of the backyard where they had planted 5 cherry trees in honor of their mother. Beside each tree stood a small plaque with one of Sophia's favorite sayings, creating a living memorial that bloomed spectacularly each spring. "Of course," Alexander agreed. "Just be careful of the party decorations." As Rebecca followed the excited children outside, Megan approached her brother with a knowing smile. "Remember when you couldn't tell them apart?" she teased, nudging his shoulder. Alexander chuckled. "I still have moments of confusion if they're across the room or with their backs turned." "But not when you're talking to them," Megan observed. "You see them now. Really see them." Before Alexander could respond, the doorbell rang again, announcing the arrival of the first party guests. Soon the house was filled with the controlled chaos of 25 children and their parents, classmates of the quintuplets who had quickly embraced the unusual family into their community. Throughout the celebration, Alexander found himself repeatedly drawn to the memory garden, where a framed photograph of Sophia now stood among the cherry trees. It had been installed that morning, a birthday gift to the quintuplets that acknowledged the woman who had given them life. During a brief lull in the festivities, Alexander noticed Logan standing alone in the garden, his small face solemn as he studied his mother's picture. "You okay, buddy?" Alexander asked, approaching carefully. Logan nodded, his amber eyes, so like Alexander's own, thoughtful. "I was just telling Mom about the party. Do you think she can hear me?" Alexander placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "I think mothers always hear their children, wherever they are." Logan considered this with his characteristic careful analysis. "I wish she could have met you. I think she would have liked you now." "Now?" Alexander echoed, curious about the qualification. "Lily says Mom always told us you were building important things to help people," Logan explained. "But now you build important things with us, too." The simple observation struck Alexander deeply. It was true. The past 6 months had shifted his definition of what constituted important work. The technological innovations that had once consumed his every waking moment now shared priority with science fair projects, bedtime stories, and weekend adventures with 5 extraordinary children. Their conversation was interrupted by Lily calling from the patio. "Dad! Logan! It's time for the cake!" The birthday cake was a masterpiece of confectionery engineering. 5 interconnected cakes forming a star pattern, each segment decorated to reflect one quintuplet's personality and interests. The children gasped in delight when they saw it, immediately identifying which segment belonged to whom. As everyone gathered to sing Happy Birthday, Alexander found himself standing between Rebecca and Megan, the 3 adults who formed the core of the quintuplet support system, now united in celebrating this milestone. The quintuplets stood, together behind their cake, 5 identical faces glowing in the light of 7 candles on each segment. They looked so much like Sophia in that moment that Alexander felt a bittersweet pang, grief for what had been lost, mixed with profound gratitude for what had been found. "Make a wish," called one of the party guests as the song concluded. The quintuplets exchanged glances, their silent communication passing between them. Then, with perfect synchronicity, they blew out their candles to the applause of their friends and family. Later, after the guests had departed and the quintuplets were occupied with their new presents, Alexander found himself once again in the memory garden. The afternoon sun cast dappled shadows through the cherry trees, creating a peaceful sanctuary from the day's excitement. "They're remarkable children," Rebecca said, joining him by Sophia's photograph. "She did an amazing job with them." "She did," Alexander agreed. "I wish I could thank her." Rebecca was quiet for a moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology, Alexander. A real one." He turned to her, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "I convinced myself I was protecting Sophia by keeping her away from you," Rebecca continued. "But the truth is, I was jealous of the life she had, her beauty, her brilliance, the love she found, even the miraculous quintuplets. When she struggled as a single mother, it somehow justified my belief that you would have made things worse, not better. We can't know what might have been," Alexander said gently. "No, but we can see what is," Rebecca replied. "You're the father those children deserve, the father Sophia believed you could be." Before Alexander could respond, the quintuplets emerged from the house, still dressed in their party clothes, but now clutching something they clearly wanted to show him. "Dad!" Lily called, her usual role as spokesperson in full effect. "We found something amazing in the memory box." The wooden memory box had become a Sunday night tradition. Each week, the family would select one item from its contents to discuss, gradually working through Sophia's carefully preserved mementos and letters. "What did you find?" Alexander asked as they gathered around him, their excitement palpable. Lucas held out a folded piece of paper. "It's Mom's bucket list from when she was in college. Look at number 3. Alexander unfolded the paper, revealing Sophia's handwriting, a list of dreams and goals from her early 20s. His eyes scanned down to the 3rd item. "Fall in love with someone who changes the world." "That's you," Lily said confidently. "Mom said you were changing the world with your inventions. And now you're changing our world by being our dad," Layla added, her quiet voice carrying unusual conviction. Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. The quintuplets gathered closer, sensing his reaction with their extraordinary empathy. "Group hug," Liam declared, initiating one of the family's newest traditions. Alexander found himself enveloped by 5 pairs of arms, 5 hearts beating against his own. 6 months ago, he had been a solitary figure driving through a storm, focused only on the next business achievement. Today, he stood in a garden created to honor a woman he had loved and lost, surrounded by the 5 miracles she had given the world, and against all odds, given back to him. "I have something to show you too," Alexander said when the hug finally broke apart. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a set of 5 identical silver pendants, each containing a tiny fragment of silicon wafer. "This is from the first computer chip I ever designed," he explained. "The one that started Reed Technologies. I had it divided into 5 pieces. 1. For each of you." The quintuplets accepted the pendants with reverent wonder, immediately helping each other put them on. "Does this mean we're part of what you built?" Logan asked, fingering his pendant thoughtfully. "No," Alexander replied, kneeling. "To their level, it means what I built is now part of who we are together." As the sun began to set on the quintuplets' 7th birthday, casting long shadows across their memory garden, Alexander Reed, billionaire CEO and father of 5, watched his children examine their new treasures. The merger of his past achievements with their future potential felt right, in a way no business success ever had. The note that had changed everything 6 months ago, "You're our father," had been a beginning, not an ending. A beginning that would continue to unfold in ways he could never have imagined as they built something far more valuable than any empire or innovation: a family. And that, Alexander now understood, was the most important thing he would ever help create. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.